Vivid verses.
The hum of the Xylos dishwasher was a constant, a low-frequency vibration that usually signaled the end of a successful day. In our house, located in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Oak Haven, routines were the architecture of our existence. I liked the architecture. It was predictable, efficient, and, until 7 minutes ago, I believed it was structurally sound. I was at the sink, rinsing the remains of a garlic-infused risotto from a porcelain plate. Beside me, Kara was leaning against the polished obsidian countertop, her fingers tracing the edge of a coaster. She wasn't helping, which was the first data point I logged. Usually, we worked in tandem, a choreographed dance of clearing and cleaning that we perfected over 7 years of marriage. "Fisher," she said. I didn't turn around immediately. I finished the plate, placed it in the rack, and then wiped my hands on the linen towel. I noticed the way she was standing, weight shifted to her left leg, arms crossed tightly, chin tucked. In a lexicon of body language, this was a defensive crouch. She was bracing for impact. "Yes," I replied, turning to face her. My voice was level, a neutral frequency. "I don't feel attracted to you anymore." The statement was a blunt force instrument. In the world of systems architecture, my profession, this was the equivalent of a core server failure without a backup. However, my internal processor didn't skip a beat. I observed the tactical delivery. She hadn't led with a grievance. She hadn't brought up my long hours at Ether Dynamics or the fact that I'd forgotten to pick up the dry cleaning 3 weeks ago. She had gone straight for the fundamental biological and emotional tether of a marriage. I watched her eyes. They were searching for a flicker of pain, a spark of outrage, or the beginning of a plea. I gave her none of those. "I see," I said. I leaned back against the sink, my posture relaxed. "I appreciate the clarity, Kara. Honesty of that magnitude isn't easy to voice." The confusion hit her almost instantly. Her eyebrows knitted together, a micro-expression of frustration. This wasn't the script she had written. She had likely expected a why, or a what did I do, or perhaps a desperate, how can we fix this? "That's it?" she asked, her voice rising half an octave. "You appreciate the honesty? What would be the logical alternative?" I asked, a faint, genuine smile touching my lips. "To argue with your biology? To tell you that your subjective experience of attraction is factually incorrect? That would be a fool's errand. You shared a vital piece of information regarding the state of our union. I'm acknowledging that data." She uncrossed her arms, then crossed them again, tighter this time. "It's just you're so calm. Do you even care?" I took a moment to analyze the question. It was a classic trap, an attempt to pivot the conversation from a revelation to my reaction. "Of course I care," I said. "But my emotional state doesn't change the reality of what you've said. If the foundation is cracked, shouting at the crack won't seal it. I'm simply processing the implications." "And what are the implications?" she challenged. "That remains to be seen," I said. "But for tonight, I think the most important thing is that you've spoken your truth. I'll finish the kitchen. You look like you need some space." She stood there for another 30 seconds, the silence heavy and discordant. I went back to the sink, picking up a stray glass. I didn't look back as she eventually turned and walked toward the stairs. I could hear the rhythmic thud of her footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and dissatisfied. Observation. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted a scene. She wanted the emotional validation of my devastation. By refusing to provide the fuel, I had left her fire struggling for oxygen. The following morning, the sun bled through the slats of the blinds, casting a grilled pattern across the duvet. Usually, my internal clock triggered at 6:15 a.m. I would slide out of bed, head to the kitchen, and prepare 2 cups of morning bowl coffee. I'd bring hers to the bedside table, a small ritual of service that I'd performed for nearly 2,500 days. Not today. I rose, showered, and dressed in a charcoal suit from Vanderbilt and Sons. I went downstairs, brewed a single cup, and sat at the breakfast nook with my Lumina tablet, scrolling through the overnight server logs for the Project Orion launch. At 6:45 a.m., I heard the floorboards groan upstairs. Minutes later, Kara appeared in the doorway, wearing her silk robe. She paused, her eyes darting to the empty spot on her nightstand, then to the kitchen counter, and finally to me. "No coffee?" she asked, her voice raspy with sleep. "The carafe is full," I said, gesturing toward the Xylos machine. "I opted for a single-serve pour this morning. It's fresh." She walked over, her movements stiff. She poured herself a cup, the clink of the ceramic against the counter sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You always bring it to me." "I did," I agreed, looking up from my tablet. I offered her a pleasant, conversational smile. But that was a gesture of intimacy within a relationship defined by mutual attraction. Since that parameter has changed, I'm recalibrating my behavior to better suit our new reality. It would feel presumptuous of me to continue such intimate rituals now, wouldn't it? Like I was trying to buy back your favor. She stared at me, the steam from her mug curling around her face. "It's just coffee, Fisher. It's not a ritual of intimacy." "On the contrary," I replied smoothly. "In a marriage, the just things are the only things that matter. The coffee, the way we touch when we pass in the hall, the shared glances. They are the currency of the relationship. If the bank is closed, the currency is devalued. I'm simply being fiscally responsible with my emotional labor." She let out a short, sharp breath, a laugh of disbelief. "You're treating our marriage like a spreadsheet." "I'm treating it with respect," I corrected. "I'm taking your words seriously. If you aren't attracted to me, then being treated like a queen by the man you don't desire must be quite uncomfortable. I'm relieving you of that burden." I stood up, tucked my tablet under my arm, and checked my watch. "I have a lead-in meeting for the new encrypted gateway. I'll be home around 6. Do you have plans for dinner?" No," she said, looking smaller than she had 5 minutes ago. "Understood. I'll likely grab something near the office. Feel free to use the Meal Dash account if you don't feel like cooking. See you later, Kara." As I walked to the garage to my Zenith GT, I felt a strange sense of lightness. There is a profound power in the truth, even when the truth is a wrecking ball. The frame, as some might call it, wasn't a mask I was wearing. It was a realization that my value wasn't tied to her perception of me. If I was no longer the lead in her romantic drama, I was more than happy to be the director of my own life. By Thursday, the tension in the house had reached a steady state. We were like two satellites sharing an orbit but never touching. I remained perfectly polite, occasionally humorous, and entirely distant. The first external test arrived in the form of an invitation. Kara's sister, Bailey, had invited us over for a small dinner with her husband, Colton. It was supposed to be a celebration of Colton's promotion at Titan Logistics. Kara found me in my study, where I was reviewing the blueprints for a decentralized data center. "Bailey called," she said, leaning against the doorframe. She was wearing a dress I'd always liked, a deep emerald green. "A tactical choice? Dinner is Saturday at 8. Colton's making his famous smoked brisket." I didn't look up immediately. I finished a line of code I was auditing. "That sounds like a lovely evening for you. I'm sure Colton will appreciate the audience." Kara went still. "For me?" The invitation was for both of us. "I'm sure it was," I said, finally leaning back and meeting her gaze. "But I think it's best if I decline. I have some deep dive work to do on the Zenith security patch, and frankly, I think the optics would be dishonest." "The optics?" she repeated. "Fisher, it's a family dinner." "Exactly. A dinner for couples. And while we are legally a couple, the internal mechanics have shifted, If I go, I'll be expected to act like your husband. I'll be expected to sit near you, perhaps put my hand on the back of your chair, laugh at the same jokes. But as we established on Tuesday, those actions are predicated on a foundation of attraction that no longer exists. You're being ridiculous, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's just one dinner. We can pretend for a few hours. Oh, but why? I asked, my tone genuinely curious. Why would you want to pretend? To protect Bailey's feelings? Or to protect your own ego from having to explain why your husband is suddenly a roommate? I'm an engineer, Kara. I don't do pretend. It's inefficient and leads to system instability. If you're not attracted to me, why would you want me there as a prop? I didn't say I wanted to divorce Fisher. I just said I wasn't attracted to you. And I heard you, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, resonant low. But attraction is the yes that makes a marriage work. Without it, the marriage is a no wrapped in a maybe. I'm simply honoring your no. You should go. Tell them I'm under a deadline. It's technically true. I'm on a deadline to figure out what the rest of my life looks like. She turned and stormed out, the sound of her heels on the hardwood echoing like a metronome. I turned back to my screen. Internal monologue. She is currently experiencing the buyer's remorse of the truth. She wanted the freedom of her feelings without the consequences of the shift in dynamic. She wants the social status of a husband without the requirement of desiring him. Fascinating. On Friday night, I decided it was time to finalize the physical transition. I had spent the last 3 nights on my side of the California king, as motionless as a statue. It was an unnecessary strain on my sleep cycle. I began moving my essentials into the guest suite at the end of the hall. It was a comfortable room, overlooking the garden I'd spent the last 3 summers meticulously landscaping. Kara walked in just as I was laying out my suits in the secondary closet. "What are you doing?" she asked. There was a genuine note of panic in her voice now. "Optimizing the living arrangements," I said, not missing a beat as I hung a blazer. It occurred to me that sharing a bed with a man you find unattractive must be quite a chore for you. I wouldn't want to impose. This way, we both get a better night's rest. "Fisher, stop this. This is cold. You're punishing me." I stopped and looked at her. I walked toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. I didn't look angry. I looked observant. "Kara, look at my face. Am I shouting? Am I calling you names? Have I cut off your access to our shared funds? Have I been anything but polite? No, but then how is this a punishment? A punishment is an act of aggression. This is an act of respect. You told me the truth. I'm acting on that truth. If I stayed in that bed, I would be a constant reminder of a desire you no longer feel. By moving here, I am giving you the space you implicitly asked for. I never asked for this. Communication isn't just words, Kara. It's the logical conclusion of words. If you say the stove is hot, the logical conclusion is that I shouldn't touch it. You said, and I'm not attracted to you. The logical conclusion is that we should no longer share an intimate space. Unless, I paused, watching her closely. Unless you were lying? Were you using that statement as a tactical maneuver to elicit a specific emotional response from me? Because if you were, that would be a very dangerous game to play with a man who values logic above all else. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing. She was searching for a way to gaslight the situation, to make her statement my fault. I was just being honest about my feelings, she finally landed on. And I'm being honest about the consequences, I said softly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very early start at the gym tomorrow. I find that when one is no longer attractive to their spouse, it's a good time to focus on one's own physical health. Purely for self-satisfaction, of course. I walked her to the door and closed it gently. Internal monologue. Cortisol levels are clearly peaking. She is realizing that she doesn't hold the remote control to my emotions. She expected a beggar. She found a king who just moved his throne to a different room. Monday brought a new strategy from Kara. I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table with a stack of papers and her Lumina laptop open. She looked tired, her hair slightly unkempt, a departure from her usual polished self. "We need to talk about the finances," she said, her voice tight. "A sensible topic," I said, pouring my coffee. "What's on your mind?" "Well, if we're going to live like roommates," she spat the word like it was bitter, "then we should probably split the bills. I've been looking at the mortgage on the Oakhaven house, the utilities, the insurance on the cars. Your half comes to about $3,500 a month." I took a sip of my coffee, let the flavor linger, then sat down across from her. I didn't look at her papers. I knew the numbers better than she did. "I appreciate the initiative," I said, "but your math is slightly skewed for a roommate agreement. Usually, roommates split costs based on square footage and usage. However, since you earn approximately $45,000 less than I do annually at your design firm, a straight 50-50 split would leave you with very little discretionary income. Are you sure that's what you want?" She bristled. "I can handle my own bills, Fisher." "I don't doubt it. But let's look at the roommate model properly. I pay for the high-speed fiber line for my work. I pay for the premium security system. I also pay the majority of the property taxes. If we move to a strict roommate contract, I'll be withdrawing my subsidization of your lifestyle choices, the yoga retreat in the mountains, the Vogue subscriptions, the premium grocery delivery. Are we ready to move to separate line items for everything?" She hesitated. The frame was holding firm. She had tried to use money as a way to get back at me, to make me feel the weight of the roommate label. She hadn't realized that I was the one carrying the financial weight of the marriage. "I just think it's fair," she whispered. "Fair is a subjective term," I said, leaning forward. "In a marriage, fair is what's mine is yours because we are a single unit. In a roommate situation, fair is what's mine is mine. I'm happy to do either, Kara, but you don't get to pick and choose which parts of the marriage you want to keep. You can't have the financial security of a husband and the emotional distance of a stranger. That's a system error." I reached over and patted her hand, a brief, clinical touch. "Think about it. Let me know by Friday. If you want to go the roommate route, I'll have my accountant draft a formal agreement." I left her there, staring at her spreadsheet. Internal monologue. She's trying to regain leverage. First, she tried emotional withdrawal, unattraction. Then she tried social pressure, the dinner. Now, financial pressure. She is failing because she is fighting a war against someone who isn't fighting back. I'm simply agreeing with her terms and showing her the full bill. By Wednesday, the atmosphere shifted again. The Cold War had turned into a charm offensive. I came home to the smell of searing steak and rosemary. Kara was in the kitchen, wearing a form-fitting black dress and heels. The table was set with the good crystal. "I made dinner," she said, her voice soft, melodic. "I thought we could have a nice night. No talk of bills or guest rooms." I hung on my coat. I smelled the air. "New York Strip? Smells excellent." We sat down. She had opened a bottle of Vanilla Gold, a very expensive vintage I'd been saving. She poured me a glass and watched me over the rim of hers. "Fisher," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been thinking. Maybe I was just stressed. Maybe the attraction isn't gone. It's just buried under the routine. You look really good in that suit, you know." She reached across the table, her fingers grazing my forearm. I didn't pull away. I didn't blush. I simply looked at her hand, then up at her eyes. I saw the desperation there. This wasn't desire. This was a survival instinct. She was losing the house, the stability, and the man who was her rock, and she was trying to use the only tool she thought she had left. "Kara," I said, my voice kind but firm, "do you remember the Project Titan launch 3 years ago, when the servers crashed and the CEO was screaming. She blinked, confused by the change in subject. Yes. What? I sat there for 6 hours, calmly rewriting the kernel code while the building felt like it was on fire. I didn't do it because I was brave. I did it because I can see the difference between a real signal and noise. This dinner? This dress? This touch? This is noise. I gently moved my arm back. You told me you weren't attracted to me when you thought you had nothing to lose. Now that you realize what the loss looks like, suddenly your attraction has returned. That's not attraction, Kara. That's a hedge against a falling market. How can you be so cynical? She cried, her eyes welling with tears. I'm not cynical. I'm observant. If I accept this attraction now, I'm agreeing to live in a world where my wife's desire is a faucet she turns on when she needs something and off when she's bored. I deserve better than to be a maybe that becomes a yes only under duress. I stood up, leaving the steak untouched. The dinner looks lovely. I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to go for a run. As I ran through the cool night air of Oak Haven, my heart rate steady at 135 BPM, I realized that the marriage wasn't just broken, it was unnecessary. I had spent 7 years maintaining a system that didn't have a fail-safe. Now I was the fail-safe. The following week, I met with a man named Jericho. He wasn't a therapist. He was a top-tier family law attorney. We sat in a high-rise office in the city, the glass walls offering a view of the Ether Towers. "You're very calm, Mr. Fisher," Jericho said, flipping through my financial disclosures. "Most men in your position are, well, they're a mess." "Emotions are poor advisors in a legal negotiation," I replied. "I want a clean break. The house goes to her. I'll take the Zenith, the motorcycle, and my investment portfolio. I've already calculated the spousal support for the next 24 months to allow her to transition her career. It's more than fair. It's extremely generous," Jericho noted. "I'm not interested in being fair," I said. "I'm interested in being finished. I want to buy my silence and my peace." When I returned home, Kara was waiting in the living room. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Where were you?" she asked. "Planning our future," I said. I handed her a folder. "These are the preliminary papers for an uncontested divorce. I've outlined a settlement that favors you significantly. You keep the house in Oak Haven. You keep the lifestyle you're accustomed to for 2 years. All I ask for is your signature." She stared at the folder as if it were a bomb. "Divorce? Fisher," I said I was sorry. I said I was wrong. "You weren't wrong, Kara. You were honest. And once that bell is rung, it cannot be unrung. I can't look at you now without seeing the woman who was willing to discard my heart, because she didn't feel it that Tuesday. I'm too intelligent to stay in a burning building just because I like the wallpaper. You never loved me," she sobbed. "If you loved me, you'd fight for me." I walked over and sat on the ottoman in front of her. I didn't touch her, but I looked at her with a profound, quiet empathy. "I did love you, Kara. I loved you with every cup of coffee, every planned weekend, and every line of code I wrote to build this life for us. But fighting for someone who doesn't want you is an insult to both people. I have too much respect for myself to beg, and too much respect for you to treat you like a prize to be won. You said you weren't attracted to me. I'm giving you exactly what you wanted, a life without me." She looked at the papers, her tears dripping onto the legal bond. "What am I supposed to do?" "You're going to find someone you are attracted to," I said. "And I hope, for your sake, you treat his heart with more care than you treated mine. Because not every man is as composed as I am." Life in the city was different 6 months later. I had a loft near the Ether campus, minimalist, high-tech, and incredibly quiet. I rode my motorcycle through the mountain passes on weekends, and I breathed. I was at a boutique grocery store called Gourmet Leaf, picking up some aged Gouda and a bottle of sparkling water. I was wearing a simple navy polo and jeans. I felt good. I'd lost 10 pounds and gained a tan for my weekend rides. I turned the corner near the frozen foods and nearly collided with a cart. Sorry, I said, moving to the side. Fisher. It was Kara. She looked different. The emerald dress was gone, replaced by a faded sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there was a weariness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. Her cart was filled with frozen dinners and cheap wine. Hello, Kara, I said, my voice as level and polite as it had been that first Tuesday night. You look well. She didn't look well. She looked like someone who had realized the market had crashed. It's been hard, she said, her voice trembling. The house is so big. And Fisher, dating is a nightmare. I met this guy, Darian, and he was so selfish. He didn't care about anything but himself. I nodded sympathetically. The world is full of different personality types. It takes time to find a match. I made a mistake, she said, stepping closer. The smell of her perfume, the same one she'd worn for years, hit me. It felt like a ghost. I think about you every day. I think about the coffee. I think about how you were always there. I was so stupid to say those things. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something. It wasn't love, and it certainly wasn't attraction. It was a mild, humorous pity. Kara, I said gently, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, and you're not missing me. You're missing the services I provided. You're missing the Fisher system, the stability, the security, the selfless care. But that system is offline now. Can't we just grab a drink? Just to talk. I checked my watch, a sleek, titanium zenith chronograph. I'm afraid I have plans. I'm meeting a friend for dinner at the Alibi. A friend, her eyes narrowed. A date. Her name is Lisa, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. She's a mathematician. We spent 2 hours last night discussing the beauty of prime numbers. And the best part, Kara? What? She whispered. She doesn't have to try to be attracted to me. She just is. It's a very efficient system. I move my cart around hers. Take care of yourself, Kara. I hope the brisket at Bailey's is good this year. I walked away without looking back. As I pushed my car toward the checkout, I noticed a slight inconsistency in the floor tiling, a fraction of an inch off. Old Fisher would have obsessed over it. New Fisher just stepped over it and kept moving. The frame wasn't just about composure. It was about knowing that once you understand the logic of a situation, you never have to be a victim of the emotion again. I stepped out into the city air, the sun setting behind the skyscrapers, and for the first time in a long time, the architecture of my life felt absolutely perfect.
Thanks for listening.